What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Fish of the Moment. In this video, I'm going to share the 5 most effective ways I've found to catch bass on crankbaits in the fall. I'm going to be talking about the best areas, retrieves, and baits you need to throw to have a lot of success with crankbaits this fall. Let's get into it. Number 1. Let's start with my favorite type of crankbait to fish in the fall, a flat-sided crankbait. Like the name implies, these flat-sided crankbaits have very flat sides and a thin profile. This gives them a more subtle action than your standard round crankbait, which is perfect for fish in this fall time of the year because you're going to have a lot of cold fronts and also weird oxygen levels in the water, making bass a little bit less likely to bite. That's what makes fall fishing so tough, but these flat-sided crankbaits can excel in these situations. They also run a little bit deeper than your standard crankbaits, getting in that 4 to 8 foot depth range, where a lot of fish will pull off to during cold fronts and rough conditions. Some of my favorite places to fish these flat-sided crankbaits are shallow drop-offs just off the bank that are in 3 to 6 feet of water. You'll have a flat that extends from the shoreline out to about maybe 20 yards off the bank, and then they'll drop off into deeper water in, let's say, 10 to 25 feet of water. Right on that break, you can find rock, wood, grass, other type of cover that the bass will pull off to when you have those cold mornings, a cold front that comes through the day, or just nasty conditions in general. When it's nice, they'll move up against the bank, or if it gets colder, they may pull out into the open, but in that in-between time in the fall, they'll sit up right on that break. You can target them with these flat-sided crankbaits. I've thrown a ton of different flat sides over the year, from these handmade custom balsa wood crankbaits to some of the mass-produced plastic crankbaits. And from all the crankbaits I've thrown, I've found one that I really like. It has a great combination of that flat profile, but it's also really easy to cast, which is hard to find with a lot of these flat-sided baits. This is the Spro Little John MD. It has a pretty small profile, but it matches a lot of these hand-carved crankbaits and still have those flat sides to it, while having an internal weight system you can actually cast into the wind and throw on standard bait casting equipment. I am going to talk about a bunch of different crankbaits in this video, but I personally have a preference for Spro crankbaits and Strike King crankbaits, so there probably are other brands that work really well. I just am going to focus on those two because that's just what I personally like. So this isn't the only crankbait that you'll find on the market probably that does what this one does, but this is just the one that I like to throw. As far as colors, I'll usually go with some sort of shad pattern as long as the Wart clarity is, let's say, more than 2 foot of visibility. But if it gets more stained up, I'll go to like a Chartreuse black back or Chartreuse blue back color in that little bit dirtier water. As far as the gear with this bait, I'm going to be throwing it on pretty much the same rod for all of these baits with one exception, and that is a Denali Lithium Pro 7 foot medium power moderate action bait casting rod. This is designed to be a crankbait rod, and it works great with some of these lighter baits, some of the little bit heavier baits, and honestly I just like to have one rod that I can throw a bunch of different stuff on so that I don't have to worry about having 7 or 8 rods on the deck when I'm throwing a crankbait. For my line, I'm usually throwing anywhere from 12 to 14 pounds Sunline FD Sniper fluorocarbon, though I may go down 10-pound tests on these flat sides if I need to get them down into that 8 to 10 foot range. And then I'll pair that with an Abu Garcia Black Max reel, just 6-3-1 reel. That's kind of my setup for these flat sides, and again, as long as you find those shallower drop-offs just off the bank with your contour line map, or maybe if you see one on your live scope or something like that, you can target them with these flat-side crankbaits. Look for isolated stumps or pieces of cover out there. You can put some really good fish in the boat. Number 2. The next crankbait I'm going to talk about is a staple in fall fishing, and that's the Squarebill Crankbait. Unlike the flat-side crankbait we talked about earlier, these Squarebills are going to have thicker body styles, they're going to have a lot more vibration, and they're going to be great when these fish are in an active feeding position. A lot of times in the fall, if you get favorable conditions with some wind and some clouds, bass will pull up really shallow, in a foot to maybe 3 feet of water on shallow banks, riprap, in shallow laydowns, all kinds of areas like that. And that's where the Squarebill crankbait really shines. You want to be fishing it wherever you see shad on these flatter banks or flatter areas and make as many casts in a day as you possibly can. The fish are going to be feeding on bait fish, and you're just trying to get a reaction strike out of those bass that are actively feeding. So making 1,000 casts in an 8-hour day will definitely improve your odds of getting bit. You want to be just burning those banks, fishing as much water as possible, and you will get bit on this bait. As far as the specific Squarebill I like to throw, again, I've thrown a bunch over the years. I used to throw the Strike King KVD 1.5 a lot, but those had a tendency to have the bills broken off and they would not run very well. So I actually paid a little bit extra to go to this Spro Fat John 60. It has this circuit board lip that doesn't break nearly as easily. It's almost indestructible. I don't think I've ever broken one of these things. And it allows me to keep grinding this bait in the rocks without worrying about that bait breaking or kind of getting chipped against a rock. This bait also is really cool because it will run just as well in a foot of water as it does in 4 to 5 feet of water. So you can really grind it down there in those shallow areas. It has a nice hunting action with somewhat flat sides to it, even though it's not really a flat side crankbait. It is pretty wide, so it has a nice wide wobble to it. And I usually throw this in a shad color, like the sexy shad. We'll also, again, go to like a Chartreuse blueback or a Chartreuse blackback if the water is a little more stained up. I'll throw this bait on the exact same gear I talked about earlier, just that Denali Lithium Pro 7-foot crankbait rod, and pair it with, again, 12 to 14 pound fluorocarbon line. Really quick, guys, I want to show you some of the new features we've added to the Deep Dive app. If you head to the new Home tab, at the top you'll see that we've added water level and current flow graphs that give you weekly and daily views of the water conditions on your lake. You can also get water clarity estimates to show you what the water clarity looks like on different sections of your lake, as well as water inflow points that show you where water funnels into your lake, and best area and tournament patterns maps to give you ideas of where anglers caught fish on lakes similar to yours and had top 10 finishes in major events. We give you the baits, the types of structure, cover, the retrieves, everything you need to know to excel on the lake. Definitely check out all of these cool features in the Deep Dive app, linked down below. And if you don't see these features in your app right now, make sure you update it to the recent version, and you should be able to see those features in your app right now. Number 3. Next, let's talk about a bait that's a little bit of a regional specialty in my area, the rock crawler or wiggle wart style crankbait. This is a staple in pretty much every Ozark angler's tackle box. And if you're fishing in the fall and water temperatures are between 48 and 75 degrees, you're gonna be able to catch a bunch of fish on these medium diving crawfish imitator crankbaits. Again, there's a bunch of different crankbaits out in the market that kind of imitate that old wiggle wart style. I just really like this rock crawler. It's just something everyone in my area throws, so I've kind of gotten in the habit of picking these up as well. One thing I like about the rock crawler over the old wiggle wart is that it dives just a little bit deeper into that 9 to 14 foot zone. There's also multiple different sizes. You have a MD version, which runs 4 to 8 feet. Then you have the standard version that dives 9 to 14. They also came out with this rock crawler 50 that is a little bit smaller profile than the standard rock crawler and the standard wiggle wart, which gives you just another option to throw. Comes in a lot of awesome colors, and I throw all kinds. I have actually a bunch on my wall behind me there, and I've experimented with a lot of them. Usually just a standard Craw color though is gonna get the job done. And what I like to do with this bait is fish it in areas where crawfish are going to be setting up in the fall. Usually that means fishing chunk rock banks or rock transition areas where you have a channel swing coming up tight against the bank and then swinging away from that bank. You'll notice when you run down a lot of these Ozark lakes that have rock on them that the rock will transition from a bluff wall area to maybe some bigger chunk rock to pea gravel. These transition spots are where a lot of the bass are going to set up in the fall time of the year. And you can basically just burn the bank with this rock crawler, casting parallel to that bank and working it back to the boat and catch a lot of really good fish. The main thing to keep in mind with this rock crawler is that you can fish it as shallow as 2 feet of water and as deep as 14 feet of water because of that bill. So don't be afraid to work it really shallow, but also work it deeper and change the depth that you're fishing these walls, making casts maybe more straight out in front of the boat, one cast, then tight up against the wall the next cast, because the fish can be positioned anywhere from right up against the rocks to maybe 10 to 15 feet out in front of the bank. And this bait kind of targets all those depth zones. There, again, are a lot of colors in this bait. I really like this kind of natural red Craw color that's a little bit more translucent. It's a good all-around color. There's some more like burnt orange colors that work well in dirtier water, and there's some more translucent colors I'll throw. They're basically almost see-through when you have really clear water. I'll link all those colors down in the description below, just so you guys can check those out based on water clarity. This bait is really good, again, if you have rock in your lake. So even if you're not in the Ozarks, if you have those rocky banks, those rock transitions, pick up one of these Spro rock crawlers or just a standard wiggle wart, burn those banks, and you'll catch some really good fish. Number 4. Next, let's talk about another staple of fall bass fishing, the lipless crankbait. This bait can catch fish on lakes all across the country, but my favorite situation to fish this bait in is on offshore grass flats. An offshore flat is basically a large area, maybe the size of a football field, that has an average depth of 4 to 6 feet of water, and not a lot of drastic depth changes. The only major change you're going to find on these flats are places where ditches and drains run into the flat. You can find these in a contour map, and these drains will be maybe 10 to 15 feet deep. Right on the edges of these drains, you're going to have a depth change, and that's going to cause a hard edge to be formed in that grass. There'll be grass up on top of the flat and no grass in the ditch, and that hard edge is where a lot of bass are going to set up to ambush bait fish that are migrating through that ditch onto the flat. What I like to do is fish this lipless crankbait on that grass edge and purposely get this bait hung up in the grass and then rip it free. This creates a reaction strike, and it's something that a lot of anglers have done for years to a lot of success, even going back into the 80s, but there are a lot of anglers who don't think about actually purposely getting their bait hung up in the grass and then ripping it free, especially when a bait has 6 treble hooks or 6 hook points like this bait does here. The thing about these lipless crankbaits is they actually do come through the grass pretty well, as long as you have the right setup and the right hooks. My favorite bait in terms of lipless crankbaits is actually this 3/4 ounce Strike King Red Eye Shad. It's an inexpensive crankbait, but it just absolutely catches the fire out of them. And I'll usually throw this in some sort of red color. Don't know why the fish love red in the grass. I think it's because they're feeding on crawfish in there, but even if they're feeding on shad, they'll still eat this red bait. So I just always go with some type of red color when I'm fishing these grass flats. And I'll upgrade the stock treble hooks on this bait to size 2 Gamakatsu EWG trebles. I find that these hooks come through the grass extremely well, and if I go to a thicker 2X strong hook or anything like that, they seem to ball up in the grass a little bit too much. So as long as you're using this red eye shad with those size 2 Gamakatsu EWGs, you should be able to get that bait to come through the grass just by ripping your rod and pulling it through. As far as my actual rod, I do use a very specific rod for this 3/4 ounce trap, and that is a Denali Covert Light 7'6" heavy power, moderate fast action swim jig rod. This rod actually has some tip to it because it's designed to be fished with a swim jig and braided line, but it has a lot of backbone, which allows you to rip that trap out of the grass really well. But when those fish eat it, it'll just have a little bit of give to it, which will help you basically keep the hooks in the fish's mouth. This is not a crankbait rod though, so when you do set the hook into them, I kind of just try to get them to the boat as fast as I can and just flip them in. I don't really play them all that much. And when you're fishing this bigger trap with those bigger hooks, you can kind of get away with it. And I'll usually throw this with some heavier fluorocarbon line, usually 18 to 20 pound Sunline FC Sniper fluorocarbon. And then I'll use a 6-to-1 gear ratio reel like this Abu Garcia Black Max if I'm fishing in deeper water. But if I'm fishing in a lot shallower water, I'll go up to even an 8-to-1 gear ratio reel, so I can really keep that bait just above the grass, ticking that grass, and ripping it free with my rod. This is an absolutely deadly technique, and I find that that 3/4 ounce trap just gives me bigger bites than a standard 1/2 ounce. And I've even gone up to a 1 ounce trap in some of the old like actual rattle trap style baits, but that 3/4 ounce is a good happy medium for me. It gets big bites, and we'll get a lot of good reaction strikes out of that grass for you. Number 5. The last crankbait technique I want to talk about employs the same bait we just mentioned, the lipless crankbait, but this one's a little bit different. This is a 1/2 ounce Strike King Red Eye Shad in that same red color, and the reason I'm going to a 1/2 ounce size is because I'm going to be fishing this bait in a little bit shallower water around emergent bank grass. In the late fall time of the year, fish will push up into the shallow grass if you have it on your lake. And even when the water temperatures are in the high 40s, you'll still have really quality fish up there really shallow in that grass. For whatever reason, I can throw this lipless crankbait and this bait alone and generate really big strikes out of shallow water willow, shallow coontail, any type of shallow grass that's just sticking out of the water. And you're doing the same thing you're doing with this big bait in the offshore grass, you're basically purposely getting that crankbait hung up in that grass, ripping it free, and it will generate some of the biggest bites you'll get all fall. Now, the thing about these shallow emergent grass areas is that you don't want to fish the flat, nothing banks that have the grass on it. Instead, you want to find an area that has deep water access right next to some of the shallow grass. This can come in the form of a small creek channel that cuts in tight to a stretch of bank grass where the grass is only in, let's say, 2 to 4 feet of water, but maybe a half a cast away you have 20 feet of water. You also can find shallower areas that have a ditch running into them and grass on both sides, and you can actually fish the grass that, again, is out of the water instead of under the water, but is on the edge of the ditch, similar to like I was talking about with that bigger 3/4 ounce trap. The key again with this bait is purposely getting it hung up in that grass and ripping it free. And you want to work that bait pretty quickly, even though water temperatures are cold, because those fish will come up and absolutely destroy your bait for whatever reason, even though you're about to get into that winter period of time. In terms of my equipment, I actually will go down to that same 7-foot medium power, moderate action crankbait rod, just because you have to throw a little bit smaller hooks with this 1/2 ounce trap. I haven't had as much success catching them on the big 3/4 ounce trap in that shallow grass situation against the bank. Usually at 1/2 ounce gets a lot better bites. And I'll pair this hook with the same treble hooks, but one size smaller. So the size 4 Gamakatsu EWG trebles on this bait. They come through the grass extremely well, and I've caught a lot of big fish doing that over the years. I'll pair this with some 20-pound Sunline FC Sniper fluorocarbon if I'm fishing this trap shallow on this rod and reel combo, and 6:3:1 to 7:1 gear ratio reel usually works pretty well for me. All the crankbait techniques I've talked about in this video, guys, are things I've used to catch quality fish over multiple years, and I only tried to include the best techniques that I know have been proven out on a lot of different lakes across the country. So you can feel confident the techniques that I showed in this video should produce fish on your local lakes as well. It is going to vary based on the type of cover you have, the type of structure, so use the areas that I mentioned as examples and try to replicate them on your lake using these baits, and let me know in the comments if you've actually had success using these type of techniques before, or if you do go out and catch fish with what I talked about in this video, come back and leave a comment. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks for checking out this video, guys. We'll see you all next one.